Salvete discipuli. We are wrapping up chapter 6 today and finishing off there. So before we dive into the text, I want to remind you what we have already read. We talked about the two different routes that the Helvetians were pondering taking out of their land, right? Remember that they want to leave. They want to travel through the Roman territory because it's going to be safer and easier for them, less physically dangerous. And their plan is to migrate through the center of Gaul and to conquer as they go. And so they have made the decision that that is the route that they're going to take because that is the easier, safer route out of their territory. So let's go ahead and dig into the text then. We start off explaining a little bit more about exactly where they plan to cross. So if we take a look here, you'll notice that we have a lot of things underlined as being nominative, and then our verb is est. So I'm going to try to translate these in the order that they appear in the sentence, because I think that that's a closer idea to the actual Latin and what it's trying to say, but also you may find it a little bit easier to do that. Of course, if you want to rearrange it and make Geneva your subject, that's okay too. Okay, well, I will say it both ways, but what I have written down here is our translation is as close to the Latin word order as possible. Okay, so we have the last town of the Allobroges. So here the UM is our genitive plural third declension ending. And the closest, the proximum, the closest to, and we go to the dative first, the finibus, the borders of the Helvetians, is Geneva. Now you can flip this around if you want. You can say Geneva is the last town of the Allobroges and the closest to the borders of the Helvetians. That is totally fine. Okay, but what I have written here, what I said first, was as close to Latin order as possible. And I'm going to keep doing that through the rest of the translation today. And hopefully what you guys will see is that it makes sure you translate every phrase and you really zero in on the grammar rather than just trying to make it sound precisely the way you'd say it in English. It's okay to be a little flexible, right? Our next sentence is from that town. A bridge, a pons, and now that looks kind of funny, but this is a third declension noun, so pons is the nominative form. This is pons, pontus, feminine. A bridge, and then we go to the verb pertinet, stretches to the Helvetians. So this is where they're going to go. We've looked at the maps of the territory. That is where they're going to cross. And here we have a depiction of that bridge. You'll notice that Caesar is going to get up to something here. So this is actually looking ahead a little bit, where they're going to try to do some restrictions on that bridge, because that is going to be the way that the Helvetians are going to try to come in. All right, we continue. Now we have to go to existimabat first because this verb is our mental action verb that is going to introduce our indirect statement. And this indirect statement is in two parts. And that's because of the correlative conjunctions here. We have well, either or. So I have blocked off in our square brackets from allobrogibus to persuasuros as the first half of the indirect statement, and well to coacturos as the second half of the indirect statement. Now I want to point out we've seen this before where we leave out the essay in these future active infinitives. But it doesn't make sense for it to not be an infinitive, right? Because we have the mental action verb, because we have the infinitive, a participle wouldn't make sense here. So you can understand essay. Caesar does this a lot, so this is something that we're going to try to get used to. It's not super unusual, so we're going to practice. And then this is going to introduce, these two indirect statements are going to introduce the indirect command, right? Because they're going to try to persuade or force the Allobroges to do something. So ut from paterentur here is going to be the indirect command, and those commanding verbs are persuasuros and coacturos. Okay? And of course, your subjunctive is paterentur. So just having a subjunctive, remember guys, isn't going to tell you what kind of ut clause it is. You have to have those clue words that tell you what kind it is. And we've got commanding verbs. So if that's something that's been tricky, I've noticed it on a few of you guys in your assignments, make sure you're reviewing your ut clauses. We'll do some practice, I'm sure, at some point, but make sure you review those ut clauses because they're not going away. All right, let's translate. So existing mabats are verb. They were thinking or they thought is perfectly fine too. That. And then sesa is our subject. That they. And then we've got future, so we're going to translate would. They would either persuade the allobroges. Remember, you persuade an indirect object, so they're dative here. They would persuade the allobroges or compel them by force. So we here is our ablative of means or manner. And compel them by force. What are they going to compel them to do? To allow paterentor. It's a deponent verb, so it looks passive. It translates active. Them is the direct object, but so is ire, right? So them to go, right? We have two direct objects here. One's the noun, one is the verb that they're going to do, right? So by force, to allow them to go through their own territory. So Eos here is referring to the Helvetians. Suos here is referring to the allobroges. Okay, so lots of subordinate clauses on this slide, so make sure you took good notes on what each of those are. If not, rewind. Okay, here we're going to start with an ablative absolute. In omnibus rebus, and then you've got a little prep phrase in there, and comparatis is the end of the ablative absolute. So I've translated it two ways here. I've translated it literally, and then I hit a slash, and I translated it with a temporal clause. You can do either, okay? But I put them both here, and I kept them in one line here so that you can see that this is all just translation of omnibus to comparatis, that first line here. Okay, so omnibus rebus, all the things. Comparatis means prepared, right? It's a perfect passive participle. And then we're going to translate ad perfectionem as for departure. So you can do literal with all the things prepared for departure, or for all the things for departure prepared. Or you can say after all the things had been prepared for departure, or all the things for departure had been prepared. It's okay wherever you want to put ad perfectionem, as long as it's in there. Okay. And here ad usually means to. It kind of has a bit of a purpose force here, and we've seen this with ad and a gerund or a gerundive to show purpose. But you can also do it with a noun here, right? So there is a verbal idea to this noun, profectio. It's coming from the verb proficisco or proficisci profectus sum, right? We made it profectio a noun instead of an adjective. Third declension noun, okay? So after they did all that, after they're ready for departure, what do? They say a day. They picked a date, right? They set a date. On which day, so here's our ablative of time when. On which day they all gather, omnes conveniens, they all gather at the bank, the ripam, of the Rhone River. So be careful with Rodani, because you're like, oh, that's nominative plural, and it's right next to omnes, all the Rhone rivers. No, there's only one Rhone River. This is genitive singular. So you're never going to see Rodani in the plural. That would be concerning, okay? All right, last sentence, a little bit more on the date here. We're going to talk about time constructions in a minute. So it says the day, right? That day. This is id, right? We don't, dies here is masculine. It can be masculine or feminine, by the way. So the day was, and then we've got a ton of abbreviations for the rest of this. So let's take a look at our abbreviation guide down here. AD here, we're used to seeing AD to in Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, right? In our count year dates, but in Latin it actually means ante dies, days before. And then you'll see a Roman numeral, how many days before. This is 5 days before. So here ante is not a preposition, but a adverb. Okay, so the day was 5 days before, and then they tell you what day in the Roman calendar. Now, the Romans don't say, March 1st, March 2nd, March 3rd. They say, however many days in relation to 3 key dates in the Roman calendar. The calends, which is always the first of the month. The nones, which is the 5th or the 7th, depending on what month it is. Or the Ides, which is the 13th or the 15th, depending on the date. And so most of the calendar date, or most of the months, the nones are the 5th and the ides are the 13th. There are 4 months in the year that the nones are the 5th, the nones are the 7th and the 15th. That is March, right? So you can always remember that. The ides of March is always March 15th. March, May, July, and October. Those are the 4 months. Mjo, right? To help you remember. Anyway, so those are your dates. So they will count down. They'll start at the calends, right? So the calends of April is April 1st. And then they'll start counting down to the nones, right? So 4 days until the nones, 3 days until the nones, 2 days until the nones, 1 day before the nones of April. And then they'll start counting down to the ides of April. And then after that, after you get past the ides, then you start counting down to the calends of the next month. It seems a little weird, but remember that especially early Rome, that these dates were associated with religious dates and certain sacrifices and religious rites that had to be done on those particular dates. And so they don't think of the week in terms of like, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the weekend, right? They think like every day is a work day unless the priest tells you it's not, right? So those are those non-working days, right? Or other holidays that the Pontifex Maximus could establish. So we have 5 days before the calends of April. Now, by our reckoning, that makes it March 28th. And those of you who are math whizzes might be like, wait, no, miss, that should be March 27th if we're counting. But the Romans counted inclusively, so they include the day of in their reckoning of 5 days before. So it actually does, in fact, come out to March 28th. Then we get the year, but remember, they don't usually tell us the year in a number. They'll either tell you, most of the time they'll tell you the year by who's consul, because you elect new consuls every year. Most of you guys remember that when we've talked about this before in our De Bello Gallico, but if you forgot, this is a reminder that having this ablative absolute here, that literally says with Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinius as consuls, but we're translating when Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinius were consuls. Both are acceptable translations. This ablative absolute doesn't just tell you who's in charge. And a couple of you guys made a mistake and said that, the Gauls have consuls too. They do not. The Gauls do not have consuls. Only Romans have consuls. Remember that this is written for a Roman audience. So you're going to tell the date for the Roman audience in the way that makes sense to them. And for them, that's when the consuls were elected, the year that they're serving. We know that Lucius Piso and Aulus Gabinius served as consuls in 58 BCE. Okay? So the other way that they might tell the year is from what we call an AUC date, and that stands for ab, right, from urbe, the city, condita, having been founded. So they will tell the date from when Rome first existed, and they will say that Rome, their traditional date for the founding of Rome in our years is 753 BCE. Okay, so they might say it's been 700 years roughly since the founding of the city, right? A little less than that. They might do it that way, but more often you will see the consular years as their specifications. Right? So that's our translation. That's the end of chapter 6, which is excellent. We have one more chapter that we're going to read from book 1 of the De Bello Gallico, but we're going to take a little break before that. So today, do not forget to make sure you get your 6 lines 8 through 13 Google form finished. We're going to pause a minute in talking about more Caesar, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what the Roman army was like, especially how it was organized. And then we'll finish off our last book 1 chapter. I'll tell you a little bit more about how the confrontation between the Gauls and the Romans go. And then we'll talk about some other highlights of the Gallic War from there. And that should take us pretty much up to April break. So that's where we're at right now. So make sure you get those forms done. If you have questions, you can set up a Zoom call with me. Don't forget, you can also always text me on Remind if you have just a quick question. Email is good too, but actually Remind is probably the fastest way to get a response from me, as long as I'm still awake. All right. So Take care, stay safe, guys. Make sure you get your work done, and I will talk to y'all next time. Talk a little bit more about what the Roman army was like, especially how it was organized, and then we'll finish off our last book 1 chapter. I'll tell you a little bit more about how the confrontation between the Gauls and the Romans go, and then we'll talk about some other highlights of the Gallic War from there. And that should take us pretty much up to April break. So that's where we're at right now. So make sure you get those forms done. If you have questions, you can set up a Zoom call with me. Don't forget, you can also always text me on Remind if you have just a quick question. Email is good too, but actually Remind is probably the fastest way to get a response from me, as long as I'm still awake. All right. So take care. Stay safe, guys. Make sure you get your work done, and I will talk to y'all next time.